Hello everyone, it's Nick. How you all going? Hope you're having a wonderful day. It's time to finally have a real chat about what's happening moving forward with the XWA, with the game of X-Wing. Talk about the various sort of legacy rule sets that we have and work out where we're moving forward in terms of what the rule set's going to look like, what rule set it's going to most mimic moving forward. And hopefully as part of this discussion we can sort of fill in some of you newer players who may not know about the older rule sets and give you a clear indication of what's going on. Obviously, people like myself who have been in the game since first edition know the fine minutiae of all the different rule sets. You know, I've played all of them, I understand the key differences between them, and not everyone does, and that's fine, you really don't have to. At the end of the day, whether you play this game casually or you're really invested and you want to sort of really dig through all the rules and all the different units and costs and all that kind of stuff, you should be able to get enjoyment out of the game either way. That's very, very important. So hopefully this video and some of the next ones can help bridge that gap a little bit. Just before we start talking about this, yes, this is a video about X-Wing 2.0. I want to make a few things clear though. This video is not advocating for a hard reset to 2.0. I just want to draw everyone's attention to this post I made right after we got the announcement from AMG. Yes, I was quite frustrated at the time, and I did at that point advocate for a hard reset, but this was before we got information about what was happening with the XWA and all that kind of stuff. My stance on this particular point has softened. I don't think a hard reset's a good idea, and more to the point, it's important to appreciate that there are people who join the game at different points. There are people who started the game after 2.5 started, and we don't want to just invalidate their experience and say, hey, you have to play this old version of the game, you stupid nerds. No, you're not allowed to like this new one. It's silly, it's pointless. Having said that, when we look at 2.0, it is worth going through all the various differences between that and 2.5 and having a real discussion about whether or not we should be re-implementing these things, because let's be honest, 2.5 caused a lot of issues. It caused a lot of players, myself included, to drop out of the game. And we just have to have an honest and frank conversation about all these things. There are aspects of the 2.0 rule set which is more likely to be considered than others. For example, no, we're not realistically going to go back to just straight dogfighting. It looks like scenarios are here to stay. And I think the key to that is making sure scenarios are implemented in arguably a better way than AMG have been doing. We still have the Legacy project. They're still focusing on 200-point dogfighting, all that kind of stuff. They have continued that rule set, and you know, we're not trying to just invalidate that effort. We're going to have X-Wing under the XWA and Legacy, and you can choose as a player what you want to engage with. I also want to point out, yes, I have my own biases. Look, I'll just be honest right here. If there were one rule set we could choose, I would just rather play 2.0. Having said that, I just want to say to you who haven't played 2.0, or you know, you joined recently, or you didn't join recently, you've been playing the game for quite a while but you still prefer 2.5, I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong. A lot of this is very opinion based. I want to make that clear. I'm not empirically proving that 2.0 is better. It's not really the goal of this video. The goal is to just look at things and make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all having an open and honest conversation about this. Yes, there are some people in the comments, and I do see these, unfortunately, where they're just saying, you know, if we don't do this one rule set, then I'm leaving the game. And those people just don't want to engage in this conversation, honestly, and they just trash people in the comments who like other things and say, like, oh, you're dumb for liking this rule set. Just want to say, if that's you, if you're watching this video, just stop watching the video. Leave. Go outside. Touch some grass, because frankly, that attitude doesn't help. We're trying to move forward with some kind of semblance of unity, and if you're just going to try and stop that from happening, what are you even doing here, man? Just go. There's the door. See ya. So yes, let's have a conversation about the various aspects that differ 2.0 from 2.5 and sort of move on from there. So yes, we've already done a video on first edition, and if you haven't watched that, I'll pop that up here, or is it over here? I don't know, the camera always reverses it. I never get that right. Basically, no, there's not really a realistic path forward to morph the current game into 1.0. Indeed, the ethos between first and second edition really didn't change in X-Wing. 2.0 is basically a polished version of what the dev team was trying to do. It didn't fundamentally change any base core mechanics or anything like that. It was just a polish and a bounce. That was realistically what 2.0 did. So just off the bat, want to say, hey, we're not really having the conversation about the 3 different rule sets. We're really just comparing 2.0 and 2.5. With that, let's talk about the key aspects that differ 2.0 from 2.5 and discuss their validity. Alright, just looking through the notes here I've made. This is all on my Discord, by the way. Please feel free to join that if you want to be part of this conversation. Free to access, no Patreon like that. Just click the link in the description if you want to have a chat about where the future of X-Wing's going. First of all, let's talk about the point system and how that differs from 2.5. So 2.0 uses a universal 200-point system where pilots and upgrades are all part of the same pool of points, and it all has to add up to 200 points or less. There's also the bid as part of this conversation, but we'll save that for another part of this video. First of all, I wanted to have a chat about this. Just this one universal 200-point maximum granularity point system. And I gotta say, this is a key part of 2.0 that I really do miss, having played, some major tournaments in 2.5. Just full agency to the players, full agency to experiment with what there is in terms of this pool of points. There's no limitations on what ships can take beyond just their base upgrade slots. With a little caveat to that, actually, if you have a look at the points updates, there has been occasions where the upgrade slots have changed, but there's not a hard cap on the points or, the loadout cost that any one pilot can take. And this really does put the power in the hands of the players when it comes to list building. It was probably the most common complaint after we started talking about 2.5 on the channel. I don't like where list building has gone. I don't feel like it really excites me anymore. And I gotta say, in all honesty, I felt that way as well. Looking back on this old point system, I do understand why it changed. It gave a lot more power to the developers in order to balance things out. If you can temper the amount of points a certain ship, or rather a certain pilot, can take, it does help to stamp out certain problematic meta things. Also, it does help to shift the meta, where you can sort of give more points to certain pilots, and that's interesting, don't get me wrong, but I kind of like the organic nature of a more open point system. You can change things in terms of upgrade slots. You can change the nature of the costing of upgrades by saying, oh, this upgrade costs more or less based on the initiative, the size of the ship, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of flexibility for the developers to fix things from that point of view. But in terms of how the meta shifts and that kind of thing, the more open it is, the more the players can experiment, the more the players can find solutions to dealing with problematic meta lists. It also allows more avenues to victory, which means we can have more open metas, which is great. I'm not saying that you can't do that with a loadout system, but boy, does it take a lot more work from the devs to sort of manage that kind of thing. If you're going to have a large amount of viable options within the meta, which I think is in general quite desirable, if you have loadouts, if you have, capped pricing on the upgrade pool a certain pilot can take, there's a lot of work that has to go into that, to making sure that we have a lot of different viable options. Ultimately, the fewer options there are for the players, the more correct options there will end up being. I think we've seen that in recent times from AMG. If we have a look at some of the 2.5 meta currently, before there's any kinds of beta points coming out from the XWA, especially the imbalance with some of the newer standard loadouts and that kind of stuff. Ultimately, it does feel right now that there is a quote-unquote correct way of building lists. Now, I do want to point out, yes, this has happened under the 200 and 100 point systems, which are basically analogous to each other, especially when we look at things like Jump Masters in 1st edition or Nantex Fighters in 2nd edition. But the advantage was the devs were able to do emergency points changes and fix those issues in reasonably short order. I know the Nantex needed a few points changes in a very quick succession to sort of get rid of that old meta problem. But at the same time, I do kind of accept that there will be that downside even under that kind of point system, and I still think that's a better scenario than what we essentially have under 2.5. More openness, more flexibility, in my opinion, is always going to be a good thing. So out of everything we're talking about today, I think, yeah, the 200 point system is the one which I really, really want the XWA to consider. I know we have it in Legacy already, and maybe they want to keep those points of difference, but man, list building on the 200 point system, I really do miss it, like seriously. Let's move on to the mission objectives when it comes to 2.0 versus 2.5. So 2.0 is a straight dogfighting system where you essentially just need to damage your opponent's ships, take as many of them off the board, make sure you get half points on the relevant platforms, and just outscore your opponent in a very linear fashion. Now, I know a lot of people were dunking on Will Schick when he was talking about scenarios and saying, oh, players don't really know what to do when it comes to dogfighting. It was a very clumsy way of putting it. I kind of see what he meant by that. I'm not going to be too apologetic to that kind of argument, but ultimately, yes, there is that fundamental issue with dogfighting where a skilled opponent knows exactly how to approach a game of dogfighting, where a newer player might just go into a joust and like, oh, let's just mash our ships together and see what happens. When the better you get at X-Wing, you know that in certain scenarios you can't just do that. There are mathematically situations where that's just a really, really bad idea. However, having said that, I do like the simplicity in terms of your objectives, your goal, and all of those things I just mentioned. You know, how do you approach your opponent's swarm list or their ace list, or maybe they've got a couple of big chunky scum brawler ships or something like that. All of that skill involved in learning how to approach that is a really cool key part of X-Wing. I always enjoyed that. When I was at my most competitive, it's something that really rewarded me for sort of getting to know how the meta worked, getting to know how certain lists worked, and it felt good to be in a situation where you can put in the hours it takes to learn how certain lists works and learn how to counterfly them. It's a very satisfying thing from a high-level play perspective. And I do have to say as well, like even as a newer player, when I was just starting out learning how to play X-Wing, it still, wasn't a super negative experience. I mean, there were times when I played like a janky scum list against like Imperial Aces, and I just felt like I couldn't do anything. Yes, granted. But my gut reaction wasn't, this is a flaw in the game. It's like, oh, I need to learn how to deal with this. And I know not everyone engages with the game the same way. It's perfectly valid if you want to be a bit more casual and if you just want to sort of avoid the situation where you're just bashing your head against a wall over and over again because you don't really understand how to deal with the things. That can suck. That can lead to negative play experiences. But it's certainly not something that's completely eradicated by the introduction of scenarios. However, they do sort of offer different ways to score, and that can make you feel like you're more engaged with the game. Look, I get it. I get the desire to shift the game in that direction. I don't think it was done in a very effective way. Having said that, like, dogfighting fundamentally is a very straightforward, almost chess-like way to engage with the game. I know there's no RNG in chess, there's no dice, anything, but just stick with me for a moment here. It's a very linear, sort of symmetrical experience where your objectives are simplified, but the path to victories can get complicated. You got to try and outfly your opponent. You got to sort of work out the odds and that kind of stuff. I feel like when you sort of remove the complication of adding in scenarios, that fundamental part of the game, which is really, really enjoyable to engage with, is taken away a bit. So dogfighting is this thing that I don't want to see go away entirely. I know the XWA moving forward is not going to be removing scenarios. They've already sort of stated that. I would love moving forward for there to be some kind of allowance to have like maybe a separate dogfighting format or just something like that. I know myself and a lot of people I know that played X-Wing after 2.5, we'd go to the game shop, we'd sit down, we'd look at the scenarios, we'd look at our list and everything, and we'd just say, can we just dogfight? It's just so much nicer. And it's just a good simple test of how your ability in list building matches up to your opponent. It kind of sucks when, you're list building and you have to account for all these different scenarios. And yeah, I get that there's strategy in that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's invalid, but I just love the simplicity and I love the accessibility that offers. You don't have to be a master of all these different scenarios. Yes, it can suck when you don't know how to counterfly your opponent, but at least you're using all the same components in every single game. It is one strength of X-Wing, how accessible it's been, and I think moving in 2.5, AMG kind of lost sight of that. Alright, let's talk about the bumping rules now. This is probably one of the more interesting topics comparing 2.0 to 2.5. Essentially, and this is a massive oversimplification, bumping became less harsh moving into 2.5, less punishing. I say that with a caveat, it's not entirely always strictly less punishing, but it kind of mostly is. It's based largely on the perception of negative play experiences and sort of like different skill levels engaging with the game. Basically, in 2.0, if you bumped into one of your opponent's ships, or indeed one of your own ships, the mechanic worked the same in both scenarios, your ship would not be able to perform any actions, and you wouldn't be able to shoot the ship that you're touching, or any ship that you're touching when you enter into combat. Range 0 means you can't shoot each other. That is one of the fundamental things that change moving into 2.5. And I think what's going on here, this is something that I want to be careful with the language I use here, because I don't want to come off as being condescending. It feels like a negative play experience. Gotta say though, I think people perceive it more negatively than it actually is. And let me explain what I mean by that. When you lose the ability to do certain things that you felt like were a given in the game, like, oh, every activation phase, each of my ships get to move and get to take an action. Oh, suddenly I don't get to take an action because you blocked my ship. Oh no, less agency, I get to play less X-Wing. And I just want to say in response to that, well, first of all, there are other scenarios where you don't take actions when you go over rocks and, you do a red maneuver and that kind of stuff. This isn't the only way you don't take actions. But what you have to appreciate, what's going on in the scenario where you bump into one of your opponent's ships, your opponent or yourself, either intentionally or accidentally, has chosen to go into a situation where you don't have actions. You can still shoot ships. You do still get an activation during the engagement phase. You just get less resources going into that from the activation phase. And what essentially happens when you bump a ship or your opponent bumps one of your ships, you are removing the ability for those ships to shoot each other. And that can be a good or a bad thing in certain situations. There are plenty of situations where you actively want to bump into your opponent's ships or your own ships. I know that leads to like fortressing and that kind of stuff now. That's not really what I'm talking about right now. And I just want to encourage newer players to go, okay, it's not always about having your maximum amount of actions per turn. It's not always about making sure that you shoot specific ships. Fundamentally, I've always said this about X-Wing. If there's any advice I want to give new players, it's you want to try and shoot your opponent's ships more than they shoot you. That's still kind of relevant in 2.5, obviously less because you score in different ways as well, but just for the sake of argument, let's just go off that, fundamental theory for the time being. From that point of view, try not to think as bumping as this always super negative thing. Yes, ultimately you do have access to less resources. You engage a little bit less with the game because you are, not taking your actions. But this is it's a fundamental consequence, and it's a fundamental tool in your arsenal from stopping your opponent from shooting certain ships, from stopping your opponent from flying in certain directions, for counteracting like a flank, all that kind of stuff. There is so much strategy to be gained from the fact that two ships that touch each other during engagement cannot shoot each other. It is actually wild what you can do with this, to the point where it's often worth throwing away your actions to intentionally run into one of your opponent's ships. And I think sort of like having that gut negative response, like, oh, I can do less things, oh, I can't shoot this, and not appreciating what's going on, you're not letting yourself engage with a lot of the fundamental strategy that makes this game really, really fun. I really want to encourage people that have been in a situation where they just go, oh, that's unsportsmanlike, you blocked my ship, now I can't do this and that, like to appreciate that this is another thing that you can do. You can shoot your opponent's ships, you can block your opponent's ships, you can bomb your opponent's ships. These are all tools in the arsenal. It's not about being the control player that just says nope to everything, like in a game of Magic. And I fundamentally think that when AMG allowed ships to shoot each other at range 0, when they allowed ships to take a focus action when they bumped into each other, it just kind of watered down that experience. And I know a lot of newer players won't agree with that. And that's okay. You're allowed to not agree with it. But I think what ultimately ended up happening, there was a lot of leeway given to the more casual players, but heavily at the expense of those who wanted to engage in high-level play. I think one of the cool things about X-Wing is it's fun on both levels, and when you sort of sate one of those groups and sacrifice the experience of the other, it kind of sucks. So I really am a huge advocate of the old way bumping used to work. Just rolling back the conversation around the 200 point system, though, I do want to say that in terms of the bid system, in terms of how road's been implemented, basically, if you're not aware, the old system used to say, okay, you can have up to 200 points in your squad. Anything less than that is considered a bid. Say you have 197 points, that is considered a 3-point bid. At the start of the match, the person with the highest bid gets to choose who goes first. In that, whenever two ships with the same initiative come to activate, the first player always has to activate their ships first. Usually as an ace player, for example, you'd want to force your opponent to go first so you can counteract their flying by having full information on the board and being able to arc dodge them or whatever, all that kind of stuff. And I do understand the fundamental negative play experience in that, and I do appreciate it. I gotta say, when 2.5 was announced and we had that big discussion on the channel about it, Road was one of those things I was most concerned about. Basically, every single turn before your ships come to activate, you roll dice, and it's randomly assigned what happens when there's initiative clash, whether you or your opponent's ships go first. And it actually was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I actually really like Road. I like that there's a conversation about people wanting to do random orders before dials, so you do have that information while you're dialing up your ships and your maneuvers, that kind of stuff. But Road actually introduces something interesting because you have to account for more scenarios. It adds more complexity, but yeah, that's a whole other thing. And I think ultimately that's why AMG ended up softening the bumping rules. That's why I'm bringing this up right now. I would be very, very curious about a 2.0 set of bumping rules combined with something like random order after dials or before dials. That's something I really want to see explored. The way it is right now, I just don't think is fully embracing the ethos of what X-Wing is in terms of rewarding high-level play. And I know this seems like a very minor rule for me to really dwell on, but boy, the old bumping rules. There are times in where you sort of really strategize things out and say you're down to your last ship and your opponent's got like 3 X-Wings against your fire spray. The way bumping works and the way you can sort of leverage, the size and maneuverability of your ship to lock out your opponent shooting you, it's so satisfying when you can sort of leverage your resources against your opponent. You have these tools to not just be blown out of the sky, and you don't just bump into everyone and everyone just shoots at range 0 and it just basically becomes rollsies at that point. I really honestly do miss the old bump rules. I know I'm trying not to just gush about the 2.0 rule set. I can't help it in some points, and that's just this and the 200 point system. That's just something I'm always going to be passionate about. Okay, there's one more thing. And I think this one's a bit more clear cut, and I'd be very surprised if the XWA didn't roll back to that system, and that's the way tournament clocks are used in 2.0. Basically, this was universal information, an hour and 15 minutes. Clock's up on the screen. You can see it on the wall and everyone can see that. Yes, there were inherent problems with that where people could slow play or play faster because they're trying to accelerate or decelerate the game to a certain game state where they win as the clock strikes 0. Yes, that is ultimately a problem. I absolutely acknowledge that. But the way 2.5 has introduced this, like, it's either 5 minutes more or less and it's always a secret, that kind of thing. I think it just adds too much complexity to the way tournaments are run, personally. I take the problems of the old system over the new one. I think just universal information is good. And if slow play and quick playing does become an issue, that's, when we've got to involve judges and that kind of thing. And that's okay. I mean, honestly, larger scale tournaments, more higher stakes tournaments, that's just got to be a reality. That's pretty much a reality in all games. Like, having a secret clock, having no idea about where the game is, or you've just gotten really good at sort of guessing what time it is at a game, that actually allows very experienced players to still leverage their skill over a new player. So if it was about, not punishing newer, more casual players, it doesn't really help from that point of view either. This is the one sort of point I want to draw on where I don't think there really is a case to keep the 2.5 rules. The tournament clock in 2.0 was much better. I'm just going to say it outright. I mean, I really tried not to just give my opinion in this video. I'm just trying to talk about things in general, but universal clock that everyone can see. Same time for every round. It's just clean. It makes the most sense. Again, you don't need any special kind of resources for that. You're not introducing this random element that it's just another thing that judges have to look for. Keeping the resources and the way the resources are implemented into the game the same in every game, I feel ultimately it's just proven to be the best way to do things. I just want to end on that point. I think that's the most sort of simplest one that I can say, hey, this is weird, the way it changed. Ultimately, I can't help but sort of be really excited about certain things. And honestly, there are elements of 2.5 that I actually think were great changes. I think there's one ultimate big reason why it didn't work overall. And I'm going to talk about that in the next video because, yes, the next one of these videos I'm going to talk about, I'm actually going to bring up 2.5 and talk about the positive things I like about that rule set. And highlight those key differences and, the ethos behind why those changes were made. No, it's not all just bad. It's absolutely not all just bad. I think ultimately this is the situation that was manufactured from 2.5 is symptomatic of a game being handed off to a company that just didn't have the same ethos as the original company. Whether that be in the way they write rules or the products they make. You all know my opinions on that, so I won't bore you more with that. In the meantime, thank you all so much for watching. Again, link for my Discord down in the description. I just want to thank everyone as well who's jumped on board and started watching the Star Wars Unlimited videos I've been making. If any of you X-Wing players are concerned that, hey, are you just going to be allocating more time to that? Those videos are ultimately a lot easier for me to make. They require far less research. Just looking at new cards, that kind of stuff, kind of sates my desire to talk about new gaming content. I don't get to do that with X-Wing anymore, so it's cool that I have that outlet. And if you haven't already, give the game a try. It is fantastic. I'm really, really enjoying it. We've got a major tournament coming up next month here in Australia, in Canberra, Onyx Unlimited. I'll have the link for that down in the description as well. And also all of the information from the XWA. We've had a lot more out of them than I expected at this point, to the point where we already know some of the broader strokes in terms of what they're looking at in the rule set, which is great to see. We already know that we're going to get a comprehensive sort of epic rule set for 2.5, which is awesome. It's something that AMG just completely dropped the ball on, so it's great to see that they're picking that up, and we actually get to see some of their output before AMG drops support ultimately in Worlds next year. Alright, I've rambled on for long enough. Please in the comments let me know what you think of all these various rules and what the best thing is to do moving forward. Please, as long as it's honest conversation and you're not just here to dunk on people, all our opinions are valid. Let's be cool, guys. In the meantime, I'll catch you in the next video.